So, my final part. Again, I've spent 4 or 5 years all day, every day talking to CMOs. I'm now the CMO at Sirius, but I continue to work with about 8 CMO clients because they keep me smart and they keep me sharp and they don't make me sad like a lot of our other clients did. So, I think Thad said it, we all know it, CMOs have the shortest lifespan of any C-suite member in B2B especially, and there's a reason for that. So I'm going to get into this. Ultimately, there's a big disconnect, and I've referred to this a few times, right? So CMOs are typically asked a handful of questions fairly regularly. One of them is, our investment in marketing paying off? And typically, the responses are something like this, right? We generated all these leads, our Twitter followers increased by 40%, so yeah, it's paying off, we're doing great. That means nothing. Leads, CFOs don't care about leads. Part of what we do at Sirius is we do a lot of document review for our clients. So we'll review marketing plans, but we review a lot of QBR presentations from CMOs, right? They're going into QBR, they gotta present something, and I can't tell you how frequently those presentations open up with first, volume of activity. It's like they're trying to justify their existence. Look at all this stuff. We sent X million emails, hosted 35 events, we did all these things. Nobody cares, and that is no way to justify your existence just by being really busy doing a lot of stuff. And then they get into things like these kinds of metrics, page views and impressions and followers, and all these things are up. And I'm not saying it's not correct to take pride in the volume of work you and your team do and these kinds of numbers, but literally nobody cares outside of the marketing organization about those, unless you are linking them directly to business outcomes that they do care about. So, that's one of the reasons CMOs make me sad. The next is, hey, what's needed for sales to make its number? More leads or more salespeople, right? That's not correct. Typically not correct, right? Typically it's more productivity, right? And more effectiveness. And there's a brand component to this as well, and I'll get into that in a second. What does marketing budget always get cut first? And I already talked about this one. The CFO and the CEO don't get it, is what marketing leaders typically think. But it's mostly because from the CEO and the CFO's perspective, again, we don't have to fire people to save a bunch of money if we cut marketing budget, which there's no way around. But the bigger issue is ultimately, well, we don't know what it's going to do to the business if we cut this marketing budget. And if they don't know, that's a failure of the CMO. They need to know. All right, so what does good measurement look like, right? It tells us what happened. How does that compare with what we expected to happen? Is it better or worse, or right in line with what we expected? And why did we perform that way? So it doesn't just show outcomes and impacts, but it should tell the story of why these things happened as well. And what do we need to do to fix it, right? Or improve it, or make it better? That's what good measurement looks like. So what I'm gonna offer is what we call kind of our aligned measurement framework at Sirius Decisions. It's how I encourage all of my clients to measure marketing. This is both for internal purposes, right? Within marketing to help you improve, but also for reporting outwardly. So first is activity, right? That's the baseline, everybody does it, the volume of stuff that you do. The key is not to stop there, right? You want to talk about outputs, right? So outputs would be things like, hey, number of inquiries or even number of leads. That would be an outcome of activity that we created. But of course, the ultimate goal is to get to actual impact, right? What does this mean in terms of revenue contribution? I would even argue that pipeline contribution is an output and not an impact on the business. You got to get all the way to revenue. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to actually tell the real impact that it's having. So pretty straightforward, just a structured approach, right? We're presenting to the CFO, the CEO, the board of directors. You want to start with impact, obviously. You can have activity in your back pocket because it's always nice to tell the story of how all that stuff links to the ultimate impact. But there's another component that is oftentimes left out, and this is a really key one for aligning with finance and your CFO. It's readiness. So every QBR that I present at, every time I'm in front of my board of directors, I talk about readiness because there is always a future initiative that we're going after. For us right now at Sirius Decisions, it has been expanding our business in Asia Pacific, right? We've had we've had an office in Singapore for a few years, but we're moving into India and China and Japan very aggressively. So what I do is I constantly update them on marketing's readiness to support that strategy as effectively as possible. That way, it's no surprise to anybody when suddenly I'm asking for things that I need in order to help the business get there, because they are kind of constantly hearing the story of what marketing is going to do, why, and how ready we are to do it. So talking about readiness is really key. Question?
Yeah, James, one quick question. So a lot of times we're talking to CMOs, one of the biggest challenges when you go to the impact level of revenue is that they get a little scared when it's something that they're not in entire control of.
Right.
So this is that whole marketing sales alignment where if revenue doesn't shine through, then it's not a fit sales goal.
That's right.
Standard bridge. So how do you have that conversation and get a CMO to be on the same page to agree to be held to a standard when they're not entirely in control?
Yeah, it's a good question, and sometimes you can't get there. But to me, that's all part of the fundamentals of good alignment, because in good alignment, there are mutual dependencies on both sides, right? So marketing will be asking sales to commit their time and effort to doing things like following up on what we deliver to you in a reasonable and well-defined time frame, entering data properly in our sales automation tool, right? Advancing things accurately through the system so we can see what's actually happening. So you're asking sales to do those things. So at the same time, if sales is doing those things, you have to be basically trust that they're going to be able to sell effectively as well. But be right there with them. So one of the things that I focus a lot of my time and effort on with my clients and at Sirius is pipeline acceleration work. This is marketing and sales working together to close deals more quickly. And it requires a high level of trust, right? So it used to be just 5 years ago, no sales leader would allow marketing to mess with the stuff that was in pipeline. That's ours, we own that, and you're just gonna confuse things. So it's really ultimately about establishing trust. And I'm not saying to ignore pipeline contribution because that's really big, but you have to look at the performance of the pipeline that is generated by marketing ultimately to kind of prove the case. Many times, pipeline that is sourced by marketing will not perform as well as pipeline that is sourced by sales. In fact, it's kind of a universal truth. But again, that provides an opportunity for a CMO to explain why that is. And the fact of the matter is that marketing is watching very, very closely through systems what happens to those leads that are then telequalified and then delivered to a quota-bearing rep in the timeframes within which they're advancing. And the fact of the matter is, sales puts those into opportunity stages much earlier than they put the stuff in that they source themselves. They hold on to that because they know the second it becomes opportunity, their manager is asking them, how's that coming? What's the likelihood it's going to close? What's going on? So, for example, and I'll use Sirius as an example for this one too, and we're pretty disciplined compared to most companies. We found that the average sales cycle length for an opportunity sourced by a sales rep that got to an opportunity stage was something like 14 days. When it was sourced by marketing, it was more like 85 days, right? And then we looked at the reality of it and examined it more closely, and guess what? Our average sales cycle length was more like 85 days, right? They were just holding on to it, and they were like 90% sure it was gonna close, and then putting it in. But it allows you to tell those stories and kind of get better and deeper visibility. And good CFOs care about that. They wanna understand those dynamics, right? And because it helps them, again, get more predictable revenue growth over time. So it's trust. CMOs have to trust their sales counterparts to do the right thing. And yes, it's partially out of their control once it's in their hands, but it's not entirely out of their control. So yeah, that's the best answer I have for that one. All right, so readiness, make sure you talk about that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about CMO dashboards, right? So there's two types of CMO dashboards. There's the one that the CMO should use internally to understand marketing performance and improve that performance over time. And the second is one that they kind of report out to the rest of the C-suite, the board of directors, that sort of thing, to show marketing performance to them and marketing business impact. That's what this one is. So again, purpose of a good dashboard is to regularly share marketing's impact against organizational goals. what I encourage all my clients to do is whenever you're showing marketing impact, again, just like your budget, it's in categories of business goals. It's all linked to those things. Audience, primarily CEO, CFO, other senior leadership, board of directors. Metric classes, right? Again, those metric classes that I showed in that aligned measurement framework, it's impact and summarize output and readiness, right? You want to not have activity be in this dashboard, and output should be summarized at a pretty high level. And then views, so there's always a challenge CMOs have. It's like, what are the views that I should use for my dashboard as I report out? It really depends on the business. So for example, at Sirius, what I do is I do it by critical segments, right? Those are geos. I have North America, I have EMEA, I have Asia Pacific, but also our key verticals, high tech, financial services, healthcare, advanced manufacturing, because that's how the business leaders want to see our performance and marketing's contribution to the business. And I also obviously do it by product or solution, but in big buckets. So we have our advisory services, consulting, events, parts of our business. But having multiple views is necessary. It's a bit of a pain, but it really helps the business to understand and view marketing as a more strategic contributor. So, this is just kind of a hodgepodge of my thoughts and experience in terms of what are the primary metrics to include in an effective CMO dashboard. Again, you're all going to get this. I'm not going to go through them all. There's demand, there's reputation. Reputation is awareness, perception, preference, sales enablement, and then priority programs, because we all always have other priority programs that are going on around this. One comment on reputation and brand here, because oftentimes that's the hardest thing to justify for CMOs. What I encourage, the good news is a lot of CEOs especially and CFOs kind of understand the intrinsic value of having a brand. It commands higher price points, more competitive environments, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things that I use is data that shows that stronger brand and stronger brand investment correlates to sales productivity as well, which it absolutely does. So we've been benchmarking B2B companies since 2002. So around 2008, around September of 2008, guess what? Marketing budgets changed pretty much overnight. All brand investment kind of went away and everything became focused on demand, demand, demand. Keep the lights on moment. So we've been able to track those companies over time, and guess what? Those companies that reinvested more quickly and more heavily in brand earlier than their competitors, and we look at this in terms of peer sets, completely outperform those that don't. Now, it's not the only factor, and when I say outperform, I mean higher close rates, shorter sales cycle lengths, more productive sales organization, more revenue growth, more profitability, but there's a really strong correlation there. So that kind of data is what people care about, and that's about as good as you're going to get. So, and then readiness measures, of course, right? SLA compliance, budget performance, database health and growth. All right. Just some tips on using a dashboard. Use it to tell a story. Use simple symbols, right? Red, yellow, green to show performance over time. Put data into context, right? Show performance relative to goals. Again, everything should be in the context of those primary agreed upon business goals. Think about visualization, right? Don't provide too much in the way of numbers. I know CFOs and a lot of CEOs like a lot of data, but help them to visualize what you're talking about. And weave in analysis and share insight. So that means a number of things, especially doing things like looking for relationships between data points that can be logically combined or contrasted, right? So that's really key. Don't assume anything is understood. You've got to tell the stories within this, and then and add what you're planning to do to fix things and improve over time. So, wrapping up now, big things are, perception of marketing has changed, especially in the B2B world. It's very positive right now, but that doesn't mean that everybody understands, especially CFOs, the way we contribute to the business. Establish that common language, set up a regular one-on-one. It doesn't have to be twice a month like I did. It could be once a month. And by the way, we would skip it fairly regularly too, especially once we got to know each other. Plan on ongoing collaboration, right? CMO to CFO, have them validate and audit your reporting. If you can convince them to do that, it's very powerful. And this is the one bit of advice I give every CMO is act like a business leader first and a marketing leader second, right? Speak the language of the head of sales, the CEO, and the CFO.